Hello, I'm Noir Nerd, and this is a Getting into Web Dev, a gentle intro presentation wherein I'll be talking about what you need to basically know to get into web development. Just the basics for newbies. Uh, yeah, what do you need to know? What do you need to familiarize yourself with? That sort of thing. Okay, so you want to learn a code. Where do you begin? Where do you start? What do you need to know? And what languages and technologies do you have to pick up to do this? It can be very daunting at first. I remember when I started, when I was in college, it's like learning an alien language. I mean, it is literally learning a language. So what do you need to know? So these are this basically we'll go into the differences between back end and front end development in a bit. But these are some common languages, not all by any stretch of the imagination. That would be beyond the scope of this presentation, but these are some of the technologies you're going to want to learn. And my philosophy is you start simple and then build and build and build on that as you go on. So at first we've got HTML, which stands for Hypertext Markup Language, which essentially defines content in a web page or web app, or it depends, but yeah, basically in a simple website, HTML would be how you would mark up or define the content in the page. CSS, which you can think of as cascading style sheets, which essentially is the presentation of the page, so how it looks, the user interface. JavaScript, which is used for client-side behavior, functionality, that sort of thing. So if you click around and start doing things, things happen. And then we've got backend, which I'm not going to cover as much in this presentation just because I know bits and bobs, but I'm no expert by any stretch of imagination. But anyway, that's PHP, which is the server-side web technology, Java, and database. So backends, well, I'll go into the differences between these two paradigms in a minute, but you can basically sum it up as front end is what you see as a user when you go onto a website, and back end is all the magic going on in the back end. Magic. Okay, so let's move on. So yeah, let's define terms, and that these illustrations probably are quite good to illustrate the difference. So front end's anything that the user sees and interacts with in an application or website, which we call the client side, such as the user interface, so things you click on, buttons, that sort of thing. So front-end engineers are responsible for how our app looks and how it feels. Back-end, so is everything in the background, so database requests, updating server requests, all that sort of thing. So that's that. That's what it is, basically, the definition that's often used. You can also be full stack, which is basically if you know bits of both. Or if you a full stack developer is sort of a generalist in a lot of respects. They know front end, they know back end, they can do both. I'm sort of a full stack engineer myself. I'd say I'm mid level and full stack. I'm more front end focused, but yeah, that's splitting hairs really. HTML. Okay, so the HTML is hypertext markup language. It's if we were building a house, you'd say that HTML is the bricks of the house. It's like sort of the building blocks. Doesn't apply in all situations. I know there's probably going to be people going to say that doesn't apply in all situations, but essentially for what I'm trying to illustrate here, it sort of does. So HTML has been around since the development of the World Wide Web. It describes markup and layout on a page via tags. Well, not, I shouldn't really put layout there, but anyway, it defines content via tags. So for example, a common tag you'll see is P, this one here, which is used to create a paragraph in the rendered HTML, and H2, which is just heading of type 2. There's 5 different ones you can have. Well, no, 6 actually. Anyway, so this is how it looks. You've got a opening, you got a P, open bracket, and then close bracket. You close it like that, which would then create a paragraph in your HTML. So some common tags. This is the doc type declaration. So it defines it as being type of HTML. There's different versions of HTML in the past as well, like HTML4, XHTML, many other things, but a bit beyond the scope of this presentation. Head is where you put your metadata, external dependencies such as style sheets and scripts. So for example, we were talking about CSS before, and if you wanted to link to a style sheet, you'd link it there. And body is the actual content of the HTML. So what does this thing actually look like in the wild, as it were? Go forward. So this is a really basic sort of hello world example of what a HTML file would look like in the actual code. So we have our doc type here of type HTML, which defines it as a HTML document. HTML there, which just says this is HTML. Body, which says this is the body. Everything contained within these tags is the what we want to render out to the screen and the browser interprets. And then we've got a hello world. So H1's the biggest type of heading. And then that would just be big on the screen, I would say. And then we'd have a paragraph below that says, oh, hello world. So a lot of the time if you're doing, I mean, there was a time when we were using HTML for layout, but that time has long since passed, which is where we'll go on to CSS later. Because, and good that it's passed as well, because before we had to use tables for layout, which was a bloody nightmare. And it was a bit before my time even, but I was coming into this web development world when that sort of still was a practice in some places, which is interesting. But anyway, so yeah, doing that would basically render something that looks equivalent to that about the heading. So it'd be something like that, what you'd see, which is basically very simple, but it's a good thing to get into your head. Which is where we move on to the real beauty, juicy stuff of the front end, which is CSS, cascading style sheets. So it's like the paint. So if you're building a house, and it's continuing with the house analogy, you'd have the paint. CSS would be the paint. It's how everything looks. It's like making everything look nice. Also coding and responsiveness, so it works across mobiles, tablets, that sort of thing. Okay, so there's a presentation layer. So it's used to create layout. You want to be using like something like Grid and Flexbox these days as well. So you use classes, and you can then dictate the visual style and look and feel of a web page or web app. So some common CSS properties, and there's so many to go, there's loads of them, but here's a few. Margin is space basically around an element, which you can set with pixels or EM or other measurement values. Padding is the space inside. Color, so this defines the color of a thing, usually often text or maybe, depends really, but yeah. The background color sets a background color on an element. So there's a lot you can go over with CSS, and it's sort of like the artistic side of web development, I'd say, in a lot of respects. It's quite an artistic one. So if you're quite design focused and you like how things look and making things look pretty, CSS is, well, you're going to want to learn it anyway, but if you want to really get into it, there's some people who do really groovy stuff with CSS. Anyway, let's carry on. So this is a super simple snippet of what some CSS would look like. So we have a class. So you define that with a dot in the CSS style sheet itself. This is just a super simple one of W3 schools. You'd have center. It's a class called center. The text align, it's aligning the text to center whatever the element is that's using the selector, and then it's setting the color to red. So this would be text basically in this case. And then what we do if you had a HTML file from before is we'd put p class equals center, and then that tag would then get that style. So you can make really funky things. Like this is an example from McDonald's. Like, so you can see how that's a big plus from the HTML we saw before, which is basically really rough and ready. Didn't really look very nice. But with CSS, you can make your website look something like this, or big hug burger. It just looks very nice. The colors are awesome, sort of complementary actually. Yes, you can get really artistic with that side of things. Next, we're on to the big intimidating programming language part of front-end dev, which is JavaScript. And I'll introduce you to a few things of this now. There's way loads you can cover in JavaScript. It's a huge ecosystem now. But yeah, let's go on. So there's behaviors and functionality on the client side, basically. JavaScript does do server side now, but a bit beyond this, to be honest. So it's the de facto language for creating client-side functionality in a website or web app. It does server-side, like I said, but does beyond the scope of this, not really covering Node and all that. So it comes in quite few flavors, and the ecosystem is quite complex and large. But basically, JavaScript as a language is called plain JavaScript is called vanilla JavaScript sometimes. So there's the language itself, which is just vanilla JavaScript. And then there's lots of frameworks and libraries, which like React, Vue, or Angular. React's a library. I think Vue is a framework, and Angular is a framework. I'm mostly a JavaScript, React library guy, but Vue or Angular are good as well. They're worth learning, but you don't necessarily need to learn all of these things, and you should really get confident in using just vanilla JS at first before I say you go into any of these React, Vue, or Angular, but worth just bearing in mind. So I've got an example of some syntax here. This is just lifted straight off W3C. So it's just an example of vanilla JS. So they've defined 3 variables there, X, Y, and Z. They've assigned X5, that equal sign means you assign a value to it, a number in this case. And then Y, this is basically a mathematical operation, basically. Y is equals 6. So they've assigned the value 6, it equals, it's just an assignment. And then they're saying Z equals X plus Y, so add those two things together. And then the document get ID by demo is just set in HTML would just display it on screen. And it would display, in this case, 11. But yeah, next part I'll go on to is just this is going a bit ahead of myself really, but some common operators you might use in JavaScript. So plus is assignment, so that means you assign a value using that symbol. This is abstract to quality. I won't cover too much this on it. It's probably a bit going ahead, but just to demonstrate some of the syntax, I guess. So yeah, that's not equal. That's strict equality and abstract equality, which are 2 different things you'd probably think about later on. And is an and operator. This is more for when you're doing like checking and stuff. Blah blah blah. So let's have a look at this. So this is an example I just wrote before of an if statement. An if statement is a conditional statement for checking if something is true, basically. So I've got a let defined there, called number. The variable name is number. Variable is just a way of storing information, data. Let number, shouldn't be capitalized actually, that's just because of the presentation, sorry about that. So it should say let number, assign it to 5, let number 2, assign it to 10. Then we want to check. So how we do this is if bracket number equals, so it's checking for strict equality equals number 2, this number equals 10. So if this number was 10 and this number was 10, then that would give us an alert, so the number equals 10. And then else if number is less than or equal to number 2, then a number is less than 10, which is what will get executed in this bracket. Otherwise, it just says number does not equal 10, which is like a standard. So that's just this JavaScript's a huge thing to cover, really. There's so much you could cover. Like I might do that in a separate talk, maybe like just some basics. There's let and const as well. It's just to do with scoping variables, but again, I don't want to blow up people's heads with that. I just wanted to give a sort of example of some syntax of using JavaScript. So how do you learn this stuff? It's like it seems really complicated. It seems really daunting at first. So these are a few like general tips I'd give. So I mean, you should start small. My personal preference, I think, is people should learn HTML and CSS. Don't jump in to try and create a React app or a Node.js Express API. You're just going to fall in your face quite fast if you try and do that. Build small things which are fun. So maybe just build a common thing people often do when they're starting out is a to-do app when they feel more confident, or even like, I've got a tutorial on here for creating an artist portfolio, that sort of thing. Just like simple sites, even with HTML and CSS, just to start off. Don't get stuck in tutorial hell. Tutorials are great, but use them as a stepping stone to build your own stuff. So apply your knowledge from them and then build your own little projects from that. And get used to the fact that you're going to fail a lot and really going to be tearing your hair out at times, but get to sort of love that process, I guess. So yeah, that sort of is most of it. So it's sort of a gentle introduction to some of the concepts, languages, and knowledge you'll need to approach to start learning about web dev. So this has been mostly front-end focused, but that's been mostly because it's my specialization, because I'm more front-end focused. So my general advice, if you're starting out, is just make a HTML page. You CSS, even make a page about your dog. It doesn't have to. No one else has to see it necessarily. Then get on to learning some JavaScript. Then moving on after that, maybe once you feel confident with Vanilla.js, maybe look at something like React or Vue, but don't dive into like learning React straight away. You're going to get really confused, really, to be honest, if you do that. So good luck. And then also I've added some resources here you can look at. There's Code Academy, which has a bunch of free courses. It's really good website. I've used it myself actually when I was I missed the A there actually, sorry, but it links to it. That's really good. You've got JavaScript, you've got Python even, you've got PHP, all sorts of free courses on there. Free Code Camp, similar thing, sort of free courses. I think they do workshops as well there. Mozilla MDM, which is a great developer resource for looking stuff up. And W3 Schools, which is similar, which is sort of like a developer resource and web guides. So yeah, that's the talk. Hope that's been useful. If you have any questions, just leave them in the chat below. Like and subscribe. This is the first sort of presentation thing I've done on this channel. I just wanted to create like a super simple, like where do I begin sort of presentation for newbies who wanted to maybe look into web dev. Hope that's been useful. I've been Noah Nerd. Like and subscribe if you like it, and bye.